To the first hearing of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access in the 115th Congress. I call this hearing to order. Thank you all very much for coming today. This is my first hearing as chairman of this subcommittee. I couldn't be more excited as we begin a new Congress, a new presidential administration, and with the right policies, a new chapter for the American economy. And thank you all for coming to share with us today. As a former economics professor, I'm particularly pleased that we have such a distinguished panel here today to help us explain what the economic indicators are telling us and how they reflect what we hear back home from our constituents every day. It has been said time and again, both at this subcommittee and the full committee, but I believe it cannot be stressed enough. Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. They represent 48% of workers in the private sector, 99.9% of all firms. You don't have to be an economist to understand the equation. When small businesses succeed, our country succeeds, and it's just that simple. The economy grew at an anemic rate of 1.6% in 2016 and 1.5% over the last decade or so. This rate is half of the historical average. During this period of slow growth, 155 million Americans face higher costs due to the Affordable Care Act. Americans also spend $1.89 trillion a year just to comply with federal regulations. Finally, for most small businesses, the effective tax rate is more than 47%. All of these issues have converged to affect the economy at large. Although it is important to label the problem, Congress is actively working to implement solutions. We are starting the process to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. We are passing regulatory reform bills such as Regulatory Accountability Act of 2017 and utilizing the Congressional Review Act to repeal burdensome Obama-era rules. The administration is also taking action such as their two-out, one-in regulatory approach to help cut some of the red tape faced by small business. The unified Republican government is committed to helping the nation's economy escape this slow growth, and we are backing up our words with action. American small businesses are not in business to comply with Washington, though it can sometimes feel that way. Rather, they are in business to earn a profit so they can make a living for themselves and for their families. In turn, they create jobs for their fellow Americans and help strengthen our economy. As I'm certain we will hear this morning, healthcare reform, regulatory relief, simplifying and lowering taxes, and getting Washington out of the way would unleash the power of our small businesses so they can do what they do best, grow and create jobs. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses and thank them all for being here today. We will certainly benefit from their perspectives on the state of the small business in our economy. I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. There are 29.6 million small businesses in the United States who employ about 58 million people, nearly 50% of all private sector employees in the U.S. When our small businesses succeed, America succeeds. Today here will give us a great opportunity to hear from successful small business owners about what works and what doesn't, and discuss policies that will help this sector grow. The American economy, as strong as it has been in years, while we are seeing steady and sustainable growth, certain sections such as manufacturing and construction continue to struggle. It is imperative that we do more in these areas. However, we should also remember the dire straits of our economy after the 2008 fiscal crisis. The Great Recession was the largest economic disaster in our nation faced since 1929. Housing prices plummeted more than 30%. Businesses of all sizes shedded jobs. In 2009, unemployment reached 10% nationally. That staggering number does not even include discouraged workers who left the workforce or the unemployed who took jobs where they were overqualified. Small businesses felt these challenges acutely. In the first 3 quarters of 2009, small firms accounted for almost 60% of the net job loss. As the recession caused lending to tighten, entrepreneurs increasingly struggle to access the capital. In late 2009, one survey found that 78% of small business owners reported being negatively affected by their access to capital. 8 years later, economic indicators tell a completely different story. Real gross domestic product continues to increase year after year. In 2016, the GDP increase due in part to increase in consumer spending and residential investment. Unemployment has remained below 5% for well over a year. In fact, last November, the employment rate dipped to 4.6%, the lowest has been since 2007. We have also seen considerable job growth. Over the course of the Obama administration, America gained 11 million new jobs. His presidency saw 75% straight months of job creation, the lowest continuing that is stretched in job growth since 1939. This period of growth continues, with January adding approximately 246,000 new jobs, including 62,000 small business jobs. Median household income surged in 2015 for the first time since 2007. The 5% increase we saw in 2015 showed the economy is improving, yet income remains 2.7 below its 1999 peak. Moreover, these gains have been uneven, with recovering progressing much slowly in certain industries and regions, showing that there's still a great deal of work to be done. Small businesses also have to see improvement over the last 8 years. Commercial credit conditions have eased. Demand for loans have increased as the economy has recovered. However, there remains wide differences in credit demand between small and large revenue firms. Lack of capital is one of the primary reasons business flounder. I hope today's hearing will help us better understand small companies' lending needs so that we can improve their options. The improvement economy has led small business owners to enter 2017 with more optimism about the economic future than they have in decades. However, they remain concerned about health care, taxes, and other regulation. That is why it is imperative that we ensure small businesses have a seat at the table when we discuss major policy reforms. I look forward to working with the chairman and all members and colleagues on this committee to craft bipartisan legislation policies that will help sustain and strengthen small business growth. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask they be submitted for the record. I'd like to take a moment to explain the timing lights for everyone with us today. Speakers will have 5 minutes each to deliver your testimony. The light starts out green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And finally, at the end of your 5 minutes, it will turn red. I ask that you all try to adhere to that time limit as best as possible. And so let us begin. Our first witness this morning is Dr. Stan Voiger, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. His research interests include political economics and public finance. Dr. Voiger is a board member of the Netherlands American Foundation in Washington and a senior editor at The Bulwark, a quarterly public policy journal. Dr. Voiger, you have 5 minutes, and you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Brat, Ranking Member Evans, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify here today on the state of the small business economy. The U.S. economy is still on the long way back to recovery from the 2007-2008 financial crisis. And while conventional measures such as real GDP per capita have surpassed their pre-crisis peak, a number of severe weaknesses remains. Some of these are plausibly the result of the long and deep recession the country went through, while others are symptoms of more long-run trends. As an example of the former, the number of long-term unemployed workers is still significantly above the pre-crisis level. Weaknesses of the latter variety are arguably more worrisome, as there is no reason to believe that they will, with enough time, heal and disappear. Two examples of this type of long-run weaknesses are trends in levels of concentration within industry and trends in the entry of new firms. Levels of concentration have been trending up. Entry of new firms has been trending down, and that, I think, should be of particular concern to the committee. During the same period, something else has happened, and that's what I will focus my testimony on today. Uncertainty surrounding economic policy has been elevated for quite some time now. Now, this type of policy uncertainty was widely discussed in the popular press during the crisis, after the crisis, and it's also received significant attention from academic researchers. Now, theoretical research has taught us that policy uncertainty can affect consumption, investment, as well as broader activity. And while those theoretical insights have been around for a while, going back to Milton Friedman and work even before that, recent research has also shown that these effects do indeed exist in the real world and can be shown to do so empirically. For example, higher policy uncertainty from 2008 on has been found to be associated with the deeper and longer recession. The political stalemates in the U.S. contributed to the length of the recession, as did shocks from Europe. In work with Daniel Shoak of Harvard, I myself found that increases in local, state-level uncertainty over the period was strongly correlated with the effects of the recession on employment, and that correlation is very robust to a range of other potential explanations for bad labor market outcomes. And while there's certainly, a feedback loop between outcomes and policy uncertainty, there are fiscal institutions and preparations that state and most of the federal government can take to limit those increases in uncertainty. This type of policy uncertainty is of particular concern to small businesses, which are, in a sense, more risk averse by sheer size, typically less diversified than multinational firms. And I think that this is why this is an area that should be a concern that should be of interest to this committee as it starts to legislate in this new Congress. Some of the things the committee has already contributed to, I think, have been very positive on this front. For example, the Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act, which passed as a part of H.R. 5, requires more careful consideration before new rules and regulations are implemented, demands that their impacts on small business be considered more specifically, and I think that those are good initiatives. Similarly, the HALOS Act, which passed the House last month, is helpful in limiting the reliance that small business owners and managers have on their own private capital, and allows for them to raise more outside capital, reducing potentially their levels of risk aversion and the trouble they run into when dealing with inevitable levels of policy uncertainty. And so as I conclude, I would like to ask the committee, as it proceeds to consider more legislation, to consider these potential sources of policy and regulatory uncertainty. For example, while I think that fundamental corporate tax reform is way overdue, it's, I think, important to proceed in a way that does not disrupt firm operations in unnecessary matters. Right? There's always going to be winners and losers from this kind of fundamental policy change, but I would ask for well-considered transition measures and certainly well thought out measures as they may have unintended consequences. And with that, I would like to thank you again for giving me the chance to speak here.
Thank you, Dr. Voiger. We appreciate your testimony. Our next witness is Victor Huang, Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation in Kansas City, Missouri. Mr. Huang is co-author of The Rainforest, The Secret to Building the Next Silicon Valley, and the follow-up, The Rainforest Blueprint, How to Design Your Own Silicon Valley, which examine how the innovation ecosystem in the Bay Area can be replicated in other parts of the country. Prior to joining the Kaufman Foundation, Mr. Huang co-founded Liquidity, a nanotech firm that makes filters for safe drinking water. Thank you for being here today with us, Mr. Huang. You may begin. Thank you.
Chairman Brat, Ranking Member Evans, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to testify. I'm pleased to share insights and recommendations from the Kaufman Foundation about the state of entrepreneurship in America. I'll describe the bad news, share some good news, and talk about how to address these challenges. First, the bad news. America is suffering from an entrepreneurship deficit. It's slowly but surely eroding our quality of life and our national competitiveness. I've personally experienced the challenges of starting and growing new businesses. My parents were entrepreneurs. For most of the past decade, I've been an entrepreneur and investor in Silicon Valley. And over the past year, I've gotten a big picture perspective as the head of entrepreneurship of the Kaufman Foundation. Based on our work at Kaufman, we believe this entrepreneurship deficit comes from a long-term decline in business dynamism, or the pace at which firms start and grow. As a case in point, Americans are starting new businesses at roughly half the rate they were a generation ago. The implications of this deficit are profound. Recent research is starting to show how the entrepreneurship deficit is connected to some of America's biggest challenges: slower productivity, lower wages, stagnant job growth, and rising inequality. A recent report expands on the connection between the long-term decline in entrepreneurship and the effect on productivity and growth. That lackluster productivity drags wages and living standards down. Put simply, fewer startups mean a lower quality of life for all Americans. Now, some good news. After a long hangover from the Great Recession, entrepreneurship is finally rebounding in America. According to the Kaufman Index of Entrepreneurship Series, entrepreneurship is up across all three measures: new business creation, growth, and local small business activity. Kauffman's Main Street Entrepreneurship Index is nearing a 2-decade high, driven by a jump in small business survival rates. Today, almost half of all new businesses are making it to their 5th year of operation. Both the long-term decline and the recent uptick in entrepreneurship have been shaped by 3 megatrends. These trends are affecting entrepreneurship today, and we believe will for decades to come. We call these trends the new demographics, the new map, and the new nature of entrepreneurship. Demographically, the U.S. population is increasingly becoming more racially diverse, yet the American entrepreneurial population does not reflect these changes. Today, 80% of American entrepreneurs are white and 65% are male. That's a big gap for racial minorities and women. That gap costs the country about 10 million jobs. The map of entrepreneurship, the second face of entrepreneurship, is increasingly urban. While entrepreneurial activity is growing in mid-sized cities outside of major metro areas like Silicon Valley, it's still lagging in rural communities. And technology is changing the nature of entrepreneurship. In the past, as companies scaled their revenue, jobs could scale at a similar pace. Today, companies can rapidly grow revenue and value while job growth lags behind. In response to the entrepreneurship deficit and these trends, the Kauffman Foundation today launched the Zero Barriers to Startup Challenge. We believe that entrepreneurship is a fundamental human right. You shouldn't need a formal degree. It shouldn't matter your race, your gender, or where you live. You should be able to do it quickly, inexpensively, without confusion, and without barriers imposed by others. Unfortunately, there's a big gap today between that vision and the reality. You can help people, current entrepreneurs, and those with an idea afraid to make the leap by taking that Zero Barriers to Startup Challenge with us. The Kauffman Foundation encourages members of Congress to host entrepreneurs' town halls, to tour entrepreneur support organizations, and to invite entrepreneurs to testify before this committee and others about the barriers they face. Listen to the grassroots, then act on the solutions. When barriers hinder Americans from pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams, our whole nation suffers. That's no longer conjecture. There is accumulating research evidence for it. Together, let's commit to zero barriers to entrepreneurship so that all Americans, regardless of who they are or where they're from, can turn their ideas into reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. We appreciate your testimony very much. Our third witness this morning is Holly Wade, Director of Research and Policy Analysis at the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, in Washington, D.C. At NFIB, Ms. Wade provides analysis on public policy issues and economic trends affecting small business. She also produces the monthly Small Business Economic Trends Survey with NFIB's chief economist, which surveys their members' plans for expansion, sentiment on the United States economy, and top priorities. Ms. Wade, thank you very much for being here, and you may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Brat, Ranking Member Evans, and members of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the state of the small business economy. Over the past 10 years, small business owners have struggled to bounce back from the Great Recession. The economic recovery has been painfully slow for many, at first due to poor sales, but quickly overtaken by issues related to taxes, regulations, and the cost of health insurance. NFIB's Small Business Economic Trends Survey found small business owners stuck in a below-average rut, with the survey's optimism index exceeding its 43-year average reading only 5 times since July 2007. 3 of those above-average readings recorded in the last 3 months. Owners' optimism failed to materialize as average GDP growth remained relatively flat at 2% over the last 8 years, and government policies continued to increase the cost of doing business. In response to the combination of policy constraints and anemic GDP growth, few small business owners found economic conditions supportive of investing in or growing their business. The poor business climate is further exacerbated by heightened levels of economic and government uncertainty. NFIB's 2016 Small Business Problems and Priorities Survey found that 2 of the top 10 most severe problems affecting small business owners are uncertainty related. Uncertainty about economic conditions and government actions are ranked 4th and 6th out of 75 business problems, respectively, and about 1/4 of small business owners find each a critical problem in operating their businesses, all creating significant barriers to economic growth in the small business sector. Post-election, small business owner sentiment improved dramatically, with more owners optimistic about the outlook for business conditions and business expansion. The rosier outlook has translated into more favorable expectations for sales growth and hiring to support expected gains in sales and revenue. As owners' confidence in the economy and economic policies rise, owners will be more likely to invest in and grow their business. Owners hold high expectations that Congress will now create a friendlier business climate for them to succeed. The three main concerns of small business owners for operating their businesses are taxes, compliance and disruption costs of regulations, and the rising cost of health insurance. All three of these issues consume valuable resources from small business owners, including their time diverted away from operating their business, and profits, which is the main source of financing for capital investment and business operations. For example, NFIB's newly released survey on regulations find that half of small employers report that regulations are a problem in operating their business, with 25% of them finding it a serious problem. When asked what specifically impacts them the most, 28% of small employers cite compliance costs as their biggest problem. However, 18% are most burdened by understanding how to comply with the regulations, and 17% most burdened by the extra paperwork requirements. And for over half of small employers, the volume of regulations is their biggest challenge, compared to 37% who are most troubled by a few specific ones. The volume of regulations is particularly important in that most small employers take on the responsibility of learning about new government requirements themselves instead of delegating the task to an employee. The more time they spend learning about and complying with government regulations, the less time they have in operating their business. NFIB hears from small business owners year-round about the various challenges they face operating their business, and their stories are reflected in the survey results published by the Foundation. But given the right set of policies that lower government cost hurdles for small business owners, they are in great position to invest in and grow their business. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the current state of the small business economy and the challenges it faces going forward, and look forward to working with the committee to support small businesses and the U.S. economy. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Ms. Wade. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you for coming in today. I'll now yield to the ranking member for the introduction of our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Bob Bland, who is a Brooklyn-based fashion designer, entrepreneur, community organizer, and working mother, and my constituent. She is the CEO and founder of Manufacture New York, a fashion incubator and factory hybrid dedicated to providing independent designers with the resources and skill to streamline their production process and transform local manufacturing into the most affordable, innovative option for all. An international speaker and advocate for domestic manufacturing, ethical supply chains, and design entrepreneurship education, Ms. Bland has presented Manufacture New York as a case study in Copenhagen, Seoul, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Washington, D.C., and New York City. Welcome, Ms. Bland.
Thank you, Chairman Brat and Ranking Member Evans, and thank you so much to Ranking Member Velasquez for your kind invitation to speak today. Since the Great Recession, virtually all small creative and manufacturing businesses in the nation have had the same challenges: access to affordable industrial space with long-term leases, relocation grants for those who are displaced, affordable housing within a reasonable commuting distance of their workplace, low-interest working capital and lines of credit to grow their small businesses, and competitive equipment procurement and training programs so that we as entrepreneurs can adapt to a rapidly changing global landscape. Design and manufacturing jobs specifically are more than just jobs. They are an inclusive pathway to meaningful careers and the potential for business ownership, regardless of previous educational background or socioeconomic status. With an average salary of $59,000 per year, they are more likely to include benefits and have a clear path for growth, both in terms of skills training and the opportunity to advance. The New York City fashion ecosystem is a great template for a unique and creative, dynamic ecosystem that could be used in innovation economies in other cities. And that's some of the work that Manufacturing New York specifically has done, is going to other cities, most recently North Las Vegas, for instance, and seeing how can we create that same sort of innovative manufacturing ecosystem around the country. And we need to have programs in place where we can do this not just independently, as we've been doing, but actually have federal support to create these innovation economies around the country. Small businesses and entrepreneurs are the engine of our nation's economy and drivers of innovation, and we cannot compete without having better workplace benefits, and we definitely cannot compete with larger companies that are able to afford those benefits because of the economies of scale. Freelancers and micro businesses, and when we're talking about micro businesses, saying that 25 people and under is a micro business is actually quite funny to a lot of small business owners, because that's most of our small businesses are much smaller than what the SBA currently defines as a small business or a micro business. So we also need to look at how we define what a micro business is and how we're offering support for even smaller businesses than 25 employees and under. And we do not have the infrastructure to support workers with caregiving responsibilities. I'm here with my daughter today, who's 2.5 months old, because I cannot afford to get care for her as an entrepreneur and as a business owner myself. So I've simply had to bring her with me everywhere for the last 2.5 months because there's no option for me as a business owner to take maternity leave. And so this is an example of something where the federal government could offer benefits across the board in terms of paid family leave. And I've been informed of the Family Act, which would create self-sustaining family insurance for all workers, modeled after successful state programs. And then also I would just say a national family leave policy would really reduce the burden on businesses, particularly businesses owned by women, where we're really stopped from moving forward by our duties of care, both for our children and then also elder care as well, that disproportionately affects women. In terms of the SBA and what they offer, I've personally participated in programs around the SBIR, which is essentially an equity-free venture capital fund, and I highly recommend that we continue on with those programs. With the SBA's Innovate Her program that they did in partnership with Microsoft, we participated in that, and we need to advance those sort of programs. And then also the Growth Accelerator Fund was a program through the SBA that actually supported the creation of incubators and accelerators around the country, and it really was a driver for new businesses. So I highly recommend those programs. And then also the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes under the Obama administration were an incredible driver for manufacturing, and particularly advanced manufacturing, and I would recommend that those continue forward, as well as manufacturing communities. And I know there's bipartisan legislation available around a manufacturing communities bill in both the House and the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bland. We appreciate your testimony. Now we'll begin the first round of questioning. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I was going to defer, but as an economist and professor for the last 20 years in economics, I do want to just add some preliminary remarks to set up. Everyone on the panel is referring back to the Great Recession, et cetera. And there's, I think, been a grand misdiagnosis that, the economy's been anemic because of that, and then what caused that, we usually call it a financial crisis. But I think it is important to go back to the history of what happened and what order it happened. And I don't think there's any debate the last financial crisis started in the housing market, right? That, I think, is unquestionable. And so then we get to the crux of the good policy, and why in the world would bankers make mortgages, et cetera, to folks with no incomes, right? And the answer throughout the history of American economic history is they wouldn't. Right? Something would be very strange, right? In the old days, the banker would go and meet the neighbors and say, hey, does this person to have a job and a good credit history and a good ethical reputation. Oh, good. Okay, I'll give you $100,000 for mortgage. So what changed, right, to the housing market, and which Greenspan and Bernanke, right, and they're not overly political. It's not a political argument. They said that was the asset class that had never. It was the gold standard, right? The housing sector was the gold standard. And so how in the world did the gold standard, the asset class that had never had any issues, right, every other asset class has, fall into such a ruin that did go over and fall into the financial crisis? And there, I'm not condoning Wall Street or anything, just so we're clear on the politics. When you get to the financial crisis, there were ethical misconduct all across the board. But I think it is important to go back and look at what caused the housing crisis, because that's what got us into this low-growth environment. And in my view, a lot of it was caused by bad federal policy. Fannie and Freddie, bankers no longer had to take the risk, right? That's their main job, is risk assessment. Instead of assessing risk, they'd get their fee for making a mortgage and hand off the risk immediately to Fannie and Freddie. And when Fannie and Freddie take on that risk, who owns the risk? You do, because you backstop, the American people do, right? You backstopped through the government, Fannie and Freddie. So I just think it's important to get that backstop in mind, that that was wrong federal government policy and policies which wrongly incentivize the housing market, which caused the financial crisis. And so with that in mind, I just kind of want to, we'll just start with Dr. Voiger and work our way down. We're kind of working on three big buckets right now: healthcare, efficiencies, tax reform going forward, a corporate rate and an individual rate, right, and then immediate expensing. And then the third is just the basket of regulatory reforms. In your view, where's the biggest bang for the buck? Where should we be spending most of our time up here? Or do you got to do all three? I mean, just in your experience, if you can share a little, and then Mr. Huang next.
I think focusing on all three is complicated, right? There's only so much output that the legislative branch can produce. So of those three, I would probably focus on tax reform. I think that's a good, it clarifies matters because it's a broad issue. It touches upon a lot of the problems we discussed. I think regulatory reform is important, but because so much of it is driven by it's not clear to me what beyond what the House has already done, what it can do there to really make significant progress in one specific bill or one specific initiative that does not. Maybe it's because there's so many different subparts. I would say tax reform should be the top priority.
Mr. Huang, you're.
We launched today the Zero Barriers movement, and specifically to deal with this issue of what are all the things that get in the way. And if you look at the burdens of real entrepreneurs, there are so many, and there's so many headwinds that you face. And so the movement we're trying to launch is a realization, acceptance of the fact that this stuff starts at the grassroots. It's city by city, it's county by county, district by district, state by state. And so when we tend to think about these problems, we tend to think, well, what's the one thing we can do? And ultimately, it's got to be something where we empower the community of entrepreneurs and people that fight for entrepreneurs to come up with the answers. So what we're doing is we're harvesting the answers, and we're going to be gathering them and empowering people back in their communities and supporting experiments around the country at the local level, hyper-local, to try to figure out what works and try to overcome these barriers.
Great. Ms. Wade, NFIB.
Unfortunately, all three are incredibly important for small business owners, our members. When we surveyed for the 2016 Problems and Priorities Survey, health insurance costs is the #1 problem. 52% say it's a critical issue in operating their business. Unburdensome regulations is the second most critical issue facing small business owners, and then under that is federal taxes on business income. So all three are the top three important issues that they face. When it comes to tax reform, which is incredibly important, tax reform should start with small businesses because they need parity. Small businesses should not be paying more than larger corporations in the federal tax code. And so tackling, tax reform is incredibly important in all the variety of ways that it is important for small businesses, but regulations and health insurance costs are equally important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Sorry, as the chair, I went over my own time limit. I see my time has expired, and I'd like to now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Evans, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To who?
Ms.
Oh,
Blaine, would you
do I
like to
not
answer
get
the
to-
question?
Okay. Yeah, as an entrepreneur and a small business owner myself and a woman, I just want to say that we work with, we've launched over 150 small businesses in the last 4 years, and they're primarily women and person of color owned businesses. And what we see as the two big things are the healthcare situation and really just social safety net in general, giving people the support they need to start launching their business by ensuring that they have their own personal health insurance and then also a place to live, a place to work. You know, that sort of support is needed throughout the first 2 years of a small business's launch. And then additionally with the taxes, yes, I would totally agree that my tax rate as a small business owner is way too high, and it just seems impossible for me to continue, particularly when I'm trying to create job growth, when I'm trying to hire more employees. It's especially onerous and impossible for me to continue creating more jobs and still even break even.
Let me follow up a little bit. As you know, many economists have talked about employer-based health insurance can lead to job lock, where employers stay in their job solely for the benefits. The Affordable Care Act effectively eliminates job lock.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, how important was the availability of health insurance coverage in your decision in starting up your business?
Well, originally when I started my business, it was prior to the Affordable Health Care Act, and it has actually really helped me to have flexibility as a business owner to be able to say to my employees when, because my business has less than 50 employees, so I'm not required to have health insurance. And so being able to direct them to the New York market to be able to get their health insurance and then knowing that they have that security has been incredibly beneficial, both in making sure that they have care even when I can't afford to subsidize it for them, but then also from an ethical perspective, knowing that I don't have employees on the job that are going to get sick and have nowhere to go. So I would say it's been very beneficial.
I'd like to piggyback to Mr. Stan, last name again? Vorgev, sorry about that. About this issue of policy uncertainty and the drag on the economy. I'm fascinated with what you have talked a little bit about. Can you, I heard what the chairman said as he laid out the three particular issues, but I sense that issue of policy uncertainty is probably the common denominator in the decisions that are made. Can you speak a little bit to that in terms of the impact of the issue around policy, and particularly if you talk about the Affordable Care Act? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think one priority for this Congress should be to be careful as it works toward the stated goal of repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act. I think we need to be careful not to unnecessarily disrupt, especially the individual market, which is pretty vulnerable to even announcements of future policy. Right? There are significant weaknesses in the individual market as it stands, and I would worry that if Congress goes ahead with repeal of the Affordable Care Act or significant parts of it without having a clear direction of where policy is going afterwards in mind, I would worry that the individual market would be, and that's sort of true for the small group market too, that would unravel in a way that would be detrimental.
Mr. Hahn, real quick, I have not much time, but there's a real gap for racial minorities and women. What impact does you think a lack of diversity has on the small business growth?
We've done research on this, and as I mentioned in my earlier testimony, it's about 10 million jobs, that deficit between if women and minorities were creating companies at the same rate as others. So it's a profound gap. It's also not just in terms of the gross economy, it's also in terms of at the level of innovative products. There's research out there that shows that diverse teams tend to make more innovative solutions together. And I think that goes a lot to the core of the American fabric, and what makes us competitive is the ability to bring in a diversity of ideas and talents to bear on problem solving.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back to you.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady from Puerto Rico is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be for a full panel. Even though interest rate has been low for quite some time, many small businesses owners say that they have issues obtaining credit. Why is this the case, and what may be some solutions for that?
As a small business owner who has had issues obtaining credit, I can definitely tell you that even for my business that fosters so many other businesses and is seen as a case study for what this entrepreneurial incubator ecosystem should look like, the simple matter is if you don't have, let's say I want to get a $200,000 loan. If I don't have $200,000 in security, I'm not getting a loan. It's as simple as that. You have to be able to back your own loan. And why would I need a $200,000 loan if I already had $200,000, So it's something where even with all the great programs out there, it's kind of a feel-good thing where most of my businesses, when they go after all of these low-interest loans, at this point, they still don't end up qualifying for them, because what they need is really a mix of a loan and then something that allows for more risk, like a venture capital type solution. But again, with most of these businesses, particularly in the manufacturing sector, where the growth pattern is a little slower and the overhead is a little higher, it's hard for them to get venture capital as well. So there's a lot of businesses that are caught in the middle of this, and they simply can't just bootstrap or crowdsource, and we're really missing out, particularly in the manufacturing sector.
Thank you. Mr. Juan?
Mr. Kaufman started his business, our founder of our foundation, with $5,000. And one of the questions you can ask is, could anyone obtain $5,000 in a bank loan today? And it's very, very hard. There's been a tremendous decline in community scale banking. There's been a tremendous aggregation in capital for risk. So 80% of the venture capital in the United States is concentrated in 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. So there's a unlevel playing field for capital right now, for sure. And there's several reasons that we can hypothesize around this. One is around the lack of a community connection. The chairman had talked earlier about how you could go to your neighbors and people with new relationships, and they trusted each other to pay back these loans. The disconnection of capital to the community and the people that are in these local environments has actually caused a problem, because it's made people more risk averse in lending capital. There's also, I think, a scale and difference between how we think of capital, both at the macro level and the micro level. Battleships can handle storms better than dinghies, and startups are dinghies, and it's hard for dinghies to get people to throw them these lifelines when they need them. And so I think an attention to the effect and the impact of policies on small-scale lending, not just big-scale lending, is very, very important.
I will piggyback on that. How, in your experience working in the Silicon Valley and all your research you have done for your books, can rural American territories replicate that in terms of entrepreneurship?
That's a complex answer, and there's many different aspects to that. But I think primarily one of the things where we know innovation derives from, and we know startup companies are born out of highly interconnected environments, that if we can build lots more opportunities for flows of information and people and connections to happen in communities, that's where capital comes from. It's from the flow of people with resources. It's from the trust that's built in these communities. So the effect of we can use new technological tools, we can build communities, we can do significant efforts to try to increase the interactions between people and who have resources and those that don't. That's a very core way of getting a level playing field.
I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Brat, and I thank our ranking member, Mr. Evans. I thank our panelists experts for their testimony here this morning. Today, we've heard testimony that the state of small businesses in our economy. As we all know, and it's not just cliche, small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. There are millions of Americans that are allowed to provide for their families and help our economy grow. In recent years, we have seen the effects of the Great Recession slowly recede into the distance. Wages have increased slightly, median household income is on the rise, and capital is being lent with greater ease. However, these trends are not true for all Americans. Minority communities remain disproportionately affected by the Great Recession and face difficulty obtaining jobs, receiving raises, and accessing capital. The Small Business Administration has programs in place that take into account the unique challenges that minorities and women face in accessing capital and entering the entrepreneurial realm. Yet these programs are not all of the cure. So, Mr. Huang, in your testimony, you stated that one of the megatrends affecting the spread of entrepreneurship is the increase in American diversity. As you stated, the entrepreneurship gap between white males and everyone else is wide and costs our country greatly. Aside from, to the tune of 10 million jobs, aside from cutting taxes and regulations, what can Congress do to ensure that all Americans are able to contribute and utilize their entrepreneurial acumen to inure to our economic growth? Give us a little bit more about your concept of zero barriers.
Sure. So what you're talking about is the biggest challenge facing our field today, and the biggest mission of our foundation is how do we overcome these gaps? And I wish I had all the answers for you. This is obviously a very complex question, but I think one of the very key pieces of this is that it's not just, there's hard and soft barriers. There's the hard ones, which are regulatory and legal, and the challenges, local, county, state, federal, that get in the way of entrepreneurs. But there's also the invisible ones, which are the social barriers, the disconnected parts of communities where people don't interact, where you don't get the flow of talent and ideas between different parts of communities. We see that all over the country. You have certain people where entrepreneurship has unfortunately become almost a privileged activity. And it feels like it's something that's accessible and attainable only by people who are lucky enough to understand how to do it. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be democratized where everyone has access to it. We're going to be working on this and finding new ways to do this. And ultimately, it's not about us at a foundation or people in Washington solving this. It's got to come from the grassroots. But can we find better ways to empower the grassroots to come up with these types of solutions, which can then turn into policies and actions that we can implement?
Do you see closing that gap as something that's doable, perhaps through the interconnectedness of social media, the internet, and deployment of broadband to remote areas where perhaps it doesn't currently exist?
I think it's part of it. I think new technologies are able to connect people who have not been connected before, but we've also seen increasing silos happen because of new technology. You see groups that tend to be more isolated than ever because they chat and tweet to each other rather than to others.
Double-edged sword.
It's a double-edged sword, and I think one of those fundamental challenges, which is how do we use technology in a way to nurture the very fabric that makes innovation happen and small businesses grow. I think that's an open question, and we're going to be looking at this issue closely and launching experiments. We last year just launched experiments in 12 organizations, $4.3 million, what we called the Kauffman Inclusion Challenge, into organizations across the U.S. to try to solve this issue of gender and racial barriers. But we're going to be doing more of these, and we're going to learn from that process.
Very well. Quickly, just one question to Ms. Bland. Small employers must fight harder to attract and retain talented employees than their larger counterparts. Can you explain how the ability to offer health care benefits can help your business stay competitive?
Yes, it is the single difference for me oftentimes when I'm hiring between whether I get the first tier, very best in class employee, for instance, a pattern maker that I really wanted, that I knew had the best skills in the industry. Her one caveat was she must have health insurance. And that was the difference. So at that time, I actually put together a health care plan for my employees specifically so I could hire her and then extended it to them. But again, there's so much in terms of overhead and regulations and everything that goes on in administering that plan, sometimes it would be easier if there was an independent plan like the Affordable Health Care Act, where people can just go on a market and pick their own plan, especially if I don't have enough bandwidth as an employer to do the administration on that, you know?
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for such a distinguished panel. My oldest son is a senior in college this year, and the share of entrepreneurs aged 20 to 34 has declined from 35% in 1996 to 23% in 2013. I'm hearing a lot of things. I had a small business. I ran my own law office. The question was not how much money I made that first year. It was how much I lost that first year and whether I could sustain to go into a second year. And that's truly. And I had a brand new baby about the age of yours, Miss Bland, that my wife was also working, but she was putting more money into my business than I was, than we could afford. And so we had the same struggles and the same daycare that we couldn't afford, but she had to work. And so I understand those things. But I say all that to say, being an entrepreneur and owning a small business is hard. And there's risk associated with that. And it's that great pioneer spirit of Americans who are willing to take a loss, to take a risk, to not be able to afford things that you want to do. Those are the things that made America great, will keep America great, and all those things. So what can we do to spread the risk, okay, make a level playing field so that all people, regardless of where they live or where they come from, so that all have an equal opportunity, not necessarily buy their risk, but at least make a level playing field so everyone else has, and especially in rural areas, which are much different. And I think, Mr. Wong, if you can start.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, especially on the pioneer spirit. Kansas City happens to be at the very edge of the frontier. That's where people gathered as they made the westward journey for 6 months into what was essentially no man's land at the time. And so the ability of people to organize resources in the pioneer spirit as they moved west is sort of core. It's sort of a great metaphor for the entrepreneurial spirit, which is how do you create something out of nothing. I think this issue of how we level the playing field and spread the risk, one of the issues, as you were talking about your son in college, made me realize that the way we educate people today is on how to fill jobs and how to find jobs, as opposed to how to make jobs and make a living and survive. And I think that really is to talk about that shift in how we teach people the skills for getting jobs versus how you create something that didn't exist before is a big shift that cuts across so many aspects of society, including education. So my personal feeling on this, and I think many in the foundation share this, which is this really cuts across many things, and it's education policy. It's also just a way we deal with capital allocation and capital resources and policy and the burdens that fall on entrepreneurs. I think the ability to honor the individuals, the pioneers, to understand rules and laws as they affect them, to understand the access issues they face, it's sort of flipping things upside down. We tend to focus on the top instead of the bottom. I think when we think about entrepreneurs, we've got to focus on the bottom. And what is it like to be in the situation you were in when you started?
Any of the other panel wish to comment?
At Manufacture New York, we have worked on a variety of innovative internships, apprenticeships, and workforce training programs specifically around blending STEM training and wearable technology with traditional manufacturing. And so I'm a manufacturing wonk, but I think it can extend to other types of entrepreneurship, that we need to create training programs that work around people's schedules, work around their lives, that start a little earlier on. So while folks are still in high school, that they can start doing workforce training programs so that there's not a gap. Not everyone, of course we'd love if everyone could go to college, but for some folks, particularly in the design and manufacturing industries, there might be a more hybrid program that's needed so that it's training them specifically for the career that they want to go into. And I think there's a lot to be explored in that area.
Thank you. And just, I think Dr. Varga, and I apologize, us Southerners do poorly with names. How do we, all the bright minds in Mississippi and in a lot of rural areas, they all want to go to law school. how do we encourage them to understand that maybe that's not the best way to use your talents to do that? How do we encourage that entrepreneur spirit at a young age so that they understand to have a 2-year degree, but to be able to create something or build something is being much more successful than having a law degree, which I have, which I hope I never use again.
Yeah.
But I mean, how do we create that as Congress? How do we create that entrepreneur spirit, or can we?
Well, I think one specific remedy here is to make it less profitable to be a lawyer. I think that limiting the disruptions caused by the federal government, of course, reduces the demand for lawyers to some extent. So I think that's a good place to start.
That's funny.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, that was outstanding. Thank you. I do want to thank all the panelists, all the members here today. I think this really was the diversity of ideas across everyone who testified today. We really appreciate you all being here with us and sharing your perspectives. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned, and thank you all very much. Hey, thank you. You too, man. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stress levels.